Remember this? A year ago, left-wing activists venting their rage at Donald Trump's inauguration.
Stand up. Come on up.
The beginning of a presidency that's brought extremists from both sides out into the open.
White lives matter! White lives matter! White lives matter! White lives matter!
What's wrong with having a multicultural America?
We have a right to this land. We paid for it in our own blood and our own sacrifice, and no one has a right to take it away from us.
No Trump! No KKK! No fascist USA!
Now the radical left is more organised.
Black lives, they matter here.
They're called Antifa, self-proclaimed anti-racist, anti-fascists, whose tactics shock even some on their own side.
Go over there and get ready to get hit!
I would argue we're in a new civil war.
Tonight, inside one far-left group taking up arms, they say, to protect America from neo-Nazis.
I'm not going to let people fly swastikas freely on the streets of the United States.
All right, son, put it down.
We're in rural Tennessee, the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. A century and a half later, racism isn't bothering to hide its face like the Klan once did. We're heading to Shelbyville in Tennessee, where a group of white nationalists are holding a rally that they're calling White Lives Matter. We know counter-protesters are going to be there too, and if past events are anything to go by, it could get ugly.
I'm going to go ahead and take your basket. You ladies need anything?
Ahead of tomorrow's rally, the city centre is virtually deserted. Locals are on edge.
No one's happy about it. This doesn't represent Shelbyville, doesn't represent who we are. People are afraid. Almost everybody on the square closing their doors. I guess that's our way of saying we don't want it here.
Almost 200 years old, this small city in Middle Tennessee on the bank of the Duck River is best known for breeding horses and was once a pencil manufacturing hub. It rankles that the white nationalists are from out of town and have targeted Shelbyville for its growing population of Somali and Latin American migrants doing low-skilled jobs.
I don't want Shelbyville to be known as a place where the white supremacy rally was held and violence broke out and people were killed or run over or beaten up or anything like that, because that's not Shelbyville. That's not who we are.
The next day, this city of 21,000 looks like it's preparing for an invasion.
Thank you. There's your own table.
Clarify your signs, but which side are you at here supporting?
I'm on the counter protest.
Police are as worried about the far right as they are the far left. Those who call themselves Antifa, anti-fascists.
Is that to make sure none of the rascally leftists get all crazy?
Brandy Campbell lives in the state next door, North Carolina. A few months ago, she joined the local branch of a national far-left group called Redneck Revolt. They claim to be anti-fascist, anti-racist and anti-capitalist, and are sometimes armed.
All right, folks, they're coming in. Put up a fist in solidarity.
This is not normal. This isn't acceptable. Now we see this narrative that is completely condoned and even promoted by the president, by cabinet members, allowing really evil and detrimental ideology to take root.
You are not Christian!
Where are you from? Where are you at?
They're pieces of shit. No, that's simplistic. I'm sure that some of them are mentally ill. Personally, I think that some of them are consumed by evil. How do you explain people who allow themselves to spout that kind of rhetoric? That's evil.
Across the barricades is white nationalist leader Matthew Heimbach, once described as the youthful, affable face of hate in America. His group's just one of 1,600 extremist groups active in the US, at both ends of the political spectrum.
We care about your children
and the future of our race.
I first met him a couple of years ago when his group, the Traditionalist Worker Party, had just a handful of members. Now he claims to have 1,000 followers. Still tiny, but since Donald Trump's rise, extremist fringe groups on both sides are growing in numbers and influence.
Do you think you have undercover cops here mingling with
White
you?
lives matter! White 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 lives matter!
Sorry. Anyway, as you were saying.
Heimbach wants a homeland for whites only in the US, a segregated utopia in Middle America where people of colour are not welcome.
What's wrong with having a multicultural America?
Well, multicultural America leads to tension. As we see all over the world, multiculturalism leads to strife. So we think everyone has a right to their own land, but we have a right to this land. We paid for it in our own blood and our own sacrifice, and no one has a right to take it away from us.
You guys forgot your sound system, you forgot your people, you forgot your robes, you forgot your swastikas. You were gonna bust in Nazis from Detroit in your own form of affirmative action. And they're not here. Sad Nazis, we came.
Hate crimes mainly targeting African Americans, Muslims and immigrants have increased 2 years in a row across the country, and they're on track to rise for a third. The goal of groups like Matthew Heimbach's is to normalise racism.
Like working people for real life, we will march, we will struggle, we will ensure the existence of our people in the future of life because our people.
Why do you think that whites have a right to America, though?
Well, we're the ones that were able to settle, to build our nation here. We were able to come and conquer it and build and be able to create this civilization. This is ours.
In terms of a right to be here, why go back 2 or 3 or 4 generations and say those people should move? Why not go all the way back to the first peoples that were here and say everyone who came after should get out?
Well, because we made treaties for this land and we want it fair and square.
The white nationalists here are outnumbered and drowned out by their more vocal opponents.
Black Lives Matter!
Make some noise if you're from Middle Tennessee and you hate Nazis.
Still, they claim a propaganda victory.
You don't just have to physically hear us speak. By recording our speeches, doing videos, putting them online, the media allows us to be able to continue to reach even more people than the ones that came out to join us.
White lives matter! 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 White lives matter!
March! Hail victory!
Hail victory! That's awesome. All right, everyone, shields and hey, Heimbach, here's your phone. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you did an amazing job today. So everyone, load up, get together, let's form this convoy up, because this is fundamentally about us as one big family. So thank you guys, and hail victory.
Heinbach's group cap off the day's work with a visit to the pub where they brawl with a mixed-race couple.
Oh my God, she's bleeding.
It's cool. It's not cool.
We want to know more about the people on the other side who call themselves anti-fascists or Antifa. So we've come to Durham in North Carolina with Brandy Campbell, the protester we met in Shelbyville.
Redneck Revolt is an anti-fascist, anti-racist community support group, and I joined over the summer.
Redneck Revolt says its movement's growing rapidly. From a handful of chapters a year ago, they claim there are now more than 30 nationwide.
I'm going to go over a few sort of like vitals, things that you want to look at on all people.
Unlike many Antifa activists, these Redneck Revolt members have agreed to let us show their faces, though it took lengthy persuasion to be granted this access. Anti-fascist groups have been criticised by both the right and the left for their willingness to use force. They risk a backlash from the far right and police, but also from their own employers and families.
Holding onto the jaw and the sides of the head.
Today it's medical training at member Dwayne Dixon's house. The goal, they say, is to be a broad community support group aimed at helping people be self-sufficient in all aspects of their lives. They run food banks and do first aid training, but their most striking feature is their commitment to armed self-defence.
But nobody really wants to get shot. Most folks don't want to be a martyr. So it's like, you're there, I'm here. Neither one of us get shot. I have a gun, you have a gun. Everybody be cool. It's that scary point that our armed society is a polite society. So the reality is, there's a Nazi over there with a gun. I want to make sure I've got a gun too.
And I want to make sure he knows that I have a gun.
I think that also really delineates us, you know, maybe most accurately said the far left, but maybe people who just value autonomy, right? Communal and individual autonomy and freedom over fascists. The fascists are coming for you. I grew up in a military family on my father's side. His uncle, my great uncle, was a Marine. My grandfather was a bomber pilot during World War II. And then my father was a career Army officer. Also, my parents are fundamentalist Baptists. So I always say that I grew up with the sword of the Lord in one hand and the sword of the state in the other.
Dwayne Dixon's an anthropology professor who joined Redneck Revolt in 2016. Reclaiming the word redneck is supposed to be a salute to America's rural working class, a group he sees as downtrodden. Redneck Revolt is about taking back power from government and big business.
It's always profits over people. It's always about the richest people trying to increase their bottom line at the benefit of the rest of us. To sort of paraphrase poorly George Orwell, who says that the best defense against tyranny is a rifle over the fireplace of every working man, I would say working person. That may seem really simplistic, and I'm not in any way advocating that people need to be always out in the streets, but there is some way that I think it's important for us to think about the capacity for defense, for community defense.
How do you justify the use of violence as a tactic?
When the left uses violence, in the rare cases that it happens, it's resistance. that when those actions are taken, it's because some other kind of threat has already materialized, and therefore that danger coming from far-right action justifies or necessitates some kind of intervention with force.
It was this event in Charlottesville, Virginia in August 2016 that galvanised many anti-fascist groups, including Redneck Revolt.
You will not replace us! You will not replace us!
The Unite the Right rally was described as the largest far-right gathering in a generation. White nationalist groups marched against City Council plans to remove a statue of a Civil War general, only to be met by counter-protesters.
This is not just about free speech, right? These are people with clearly stated intention to carry out violence against people of color, against queer folks, against women. And they're not just speaking, they're marching. They're marching in a way that's, intimidating, as we all know, is clearly harking back to the torchlight rallies of the Nazi era.
The next day, the fight continued. Redneck Revolt came armed. They intentionally hung back from the main clashes.
Our purpose was to provide a static community defense perimeter. Our goal was to never move around, to never intimidate by being a mobile unit that would somehow suggest possible violence through carrying our weapons through the streets. We were just going to protect the perimeter of the park. We stayed on the sidewalk the entire day. We didn't venture out into the surrounding environs of the city, that we were really a known entity.
They say they were invited by a black anarchist group to provide protection, but many on the left were shocked to see their own side carrying weapons.
Whoa, hey, how's it going? Back in heat. No shit. That's pretty hardcore, man.
So you were partially unwelcome by the left then?
Or at least we knew we were being intensely scrutinized. Yeah, that we weren't necessarily a welcome presence, that maybe we were disrupting their optics. I mean, my personal rejoinder would be like, well, who's worrying about optics when people might actually be killed?
The weapons didn't stop the chaos. Police failed to intervene and were later pilloried for their inaction. There was violence on both sides, but the right took it to a new level. A white supremacist allegedly drove his car into a group of counter-protesters, injuring more than 30 people and killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer.
Somebody might be dead, folks. Somebody might... Holy shit. The cops just now getting here. Where the fuck were you?
What happened in Charlottesville was pretty unimaginable. It's unimaginable in its incoherence, that this is the United States.
And how did you feel leaving Charlottesville?
Like I had left a battlefield. Clearly no one could have predicted what it turned into. This really striking watershed moment in contemporary US history.
What's it done for groups on the left?
I think it's made people have a much higher degree of vigilance to recognize that dangers might be much closer to home than they imagined.
Dwayne Dixon's home in Durham is just a few hours' drive south of Charlottesville. It's a progressive bubble in the conservative South, a university town that grew rich from cigarettes.
Vegan order and oolong tea. So Durham's rapidly changed in the last 10 years. It's gone through a dramatic shift from being a tobacco town. When I moved here, I used to still be able to smell tobacco in the summer on a hot, humid day. That changed. But I think what's really important is to recognize it's still in the South. And even though there is a kind of the luxury of a liberal bubble where people don't really have to confront a lot of the problems that are pervasive throughout the United States, that it only takes a short drive, 10 miles or more up the road. And you really do enter rural Southern America. And it's not as simple or as stereotypical as one might imagine.
In the days after the violence in Charlottesville, local activists in Durham tore down a statue dedicated to the Civil War soldiers who fought in defence of slavery. Rumours of a Ku Klux Klan rally in town prompted Dixon to hit the streets. He believes the police are too accommodating of the far right.
And this is shades of Charlottesville all over again, in terms of the way law enforcement was noticeably absent. Getting out of the car, I made this really clear choice to take my rifle with me.
Oh, son. Wait, where are we going? Some of you that are willing to put your down, go over there and get ready to get hit.
The KKK never came, but Dwayne and those who tore down the statue were charged with multiple offences.
Would you do it again?
I've thought about this a lot, like replayed that day. Carrying a rifle, one, it insists upon my rights as a citizen to have the means for my own self-defense when the state is absent or unwilling to actually intervene. The sheriff was not protecting the people in the streets.
It sounds like you would do it again.
I would definitely do it again. I'm not going to willingly stand by. I'm not going to be passive or a spectator or fall back behind some kind of centrist line that outsources resistance to fascism, say, to the state, like imagining the police will, quote, do their job. Because I would argue they have a stake in the far-right ideology. I mean, incarceration rates, deportation rates, endless war against people abroad. There's an imperialist endeavor that the US has undertaken, and the far right, while they're not within the government, they represent arguably an extension of a line of thinking that travels through the United States government into that territory. Hey, how y'all? Hey, Chance? About time? Oh no, man, sorry.
How you been doing?
Good to meet you, man. I'm Dwayne.
Extreme circumstances can create strange bedfellows, and they don't come much more strange than this. Dwayne Dixon and his leftist crew have come to meet Chance Allen, a member of an armed militia called the American Pit Vipers, in the hope of forming an unusual alliance.
Right there's this one target we got cleared open.
Allen's a Trump voter. His group's committed to aiding law enforcement and defending free speech, including by the far right. He first encountered Redneck Revolt at a pro-Trump rally when one of his members tried to assault one of theirs.
What did you think about Antifa groups a year ago?
A year ago, it was just complete, utter hatred. And that's all there was to it. From what I thought originally, that they was just 100% anti-Americans, and after coming to find out, most of it was, you know, fake made up stuff anyhow.
Shocked by the violence in Charlottesville, both groups now recognise a common cause in civil defence.
Yeah, at one time I was solid, you're not the right. But then that comes back down to once I started seeing the bullshit out there and wanting to know the facts and get to learn, that's when I started realizing it's we the people means we the people. We're all the people.
So we'll go put a target up?
You know, most media wouldn't cover this because we're not here to shoot each other.
Yeah, I really don't imagine this to be some kind of conversion crusade, but it really is trying to establish lines of affiliation, lines of affection even. All right, everybody out ear pro arm. Shooter, you ready? I'm trying to get them to point their guns in the right direction. This one, once you charge it, you want to make sure that your muzzle's basically clear, right? Okay. For us, having access to weapons and having the skill and competency with them allows us to at least consider that among a diversity of possible tactics. It doesn't mean that they're going to be used all the time, but recognizing the moment we're in when real white terrorist violence is a fact of American life. And we know that this is a real danger, and we're not willing to abdicate our own security to the state. Now try to bring it up to your shoulder. There you go.
These groups do not represent mainstream America. Out of a population of more than 320 million, they're on the fringe. But in a country awash with weapons, the growing divisiveness signals a deeply troubling shift. As we saw by their strong presence at Shelbyville, police are taking the threat of violence more seriously. Both sides say they'll do whatever it takes.
America is a house on fire and flooding simultaneously in a Lovecraftian horror hellscape. For our people, for our future. My children's life depends on me to be able to build them a better world to grow up in. And I don't want them to grow up in this one as a hated and despised minority on the land that their ancestors gave their blood and their lives to build for them. No one would question if I were to say, you know, if my family was drowning or in a house fire, if I would be willing to run in and grab my family and get them to safety, even if it would cost my own life. That's what a man is called to do, to sacrifice for his family. Well, my ethnic community is my extended family.
Like 4 inches, 5 inches. I'm not gonna let people fly swastikas freely on the streets of the United States. If we take this back to my grandfather, he would be appalled. My dad is appalled. I mean, this is a grotesque, I don't know, sneer, essentially. Like, it's just spitting in the face of the efforts of all of these men and women who actively fought against fascism. I mean, I'm never gonna stand by and let people get hurt.
All right, fire ready. Yeah, we'll show Ian what he hit. What, 1? Hey. He hit 1 with his, and
something like that. Yep.